I just said, listen up.
More?
Hey there.
More's in the back row.
Yeah.
Assignments will be made from the back. What are you working on, Kathy?
I'm in the forestry department.
Just some tips for, if any of you taking this.
I'm doing, well, I'm in, yeah. And well, I did my research in Mexico. I did a case that recently transitioned from CC to agriculture.
Second and third.
That's just
There's a student that's in, I think she'll be, let's see, is she there in the class at Stevens Point that's working? She just got back.
So can we see it?
Not yet.
Yes, actually they can.
Yeah.
You're on screen.
That's working. Her name is Terry. She's working on the
Yeah,
transition
you can
from
see
sort of
yeah,
traditional to preferred.
Oh.
And she's
This is just a handout we give to people, students who are taking distance ed classes. It just gives you some
What do you
pointers.
think, Rich? Should we roll them?
Yeah, I'll give them the protocol here quickly. I'm going to go ahead and shut the door because there are some conferences going on next door and we don't want their applause on here.
But it's unlocked, right?
Kathy's here.
That's right. She made it.
Fun time.
Yeah, just a few quick things. Your microphones, if you touch them once, the red light will come on. That means the mic is open and it'll send your audio. Touch it again, the red light will go out, and that means nothing's going out from your microphone. You want to leave them off until you actually have something to say that you want everybody to hear. If you're addressing Professor Dombeck, you want to look directly at him and talk to him. If you're saying something to people in Stevens Point, you want to look at those cameras right up above the big screen. Any questions?
Sounds like somebody turned on their mic by accident on the other end.
Yeah.
Hi,
Shall
guys.
we get started?
Are we getting started? Mike, would you like me to give a little orientation?
Well, yes, Ron, would you please do that? Thanks for helping out.
Sure, and
I've
I'll-
got Rich here at the Pyle Center that's doing sort of the same here.
Okay, great. I was just running through some of the students here, as you can see. Let's see, we do have a fairly good house here. Let's see, I think we got 2, 4, 6, 8 students here filling the second and third rows. And I was just going on to begin to explain what it is to take one of these classes. Let me just give you a little background real quick on something here, and I'm going to put up a document camera. And you might be able to see this a little bit, but if it looks like the state of Wisconsin with a lot of spaghetti thrown on top of it, what those lines represent are all of the connections and lines that go out through the state to connect what we call networks or interactive networks. And this represents what is called the BadgerNet Full Motion Video Network. And right now, where we're going from is, let's see, do I have a pen or a pencil? No, I don't, so I'm going to use my finger. We're here, or approximately in this area where my finger is, and Michael Dombeck is down here at the Pyle Center. So we're being routed through leased lines or fiber lines in order to carry an interactive video and audio teleconference between here and the Pyle Center in Madison. This allows Dr. Dombeck to be able to teach his class from the Pyle Center to the students here. Now, none of these people here told me they had ever taken a class like this, so I'm just going to give you a brief orientation. One is, it's a class. This is not television. This is a class, and you conduct yourself the same way as you would in any class. We have TVs, we have cameras. As you can see here, we have a student camera up in this area, and I'll go to the student camera. We have a student camera that's picking you up. We have an instructor camera as well that picks the instructor up when the instructor's at this desk. Now, when the instructor is not here, what we have is, let's see if I can pick him up sitting over here way off to my side. Oops, he's on the other side. This is Steve. And Steve is one of our student facilitators, and he will be running the panel that I have in front of me and serving as a facilitator during this class. If Dr. Dombeck wants to pick up a particular student. You can't hide, by the way, from this. This is one of those technologies that no matter how far back you sit in the room, we can always find you by a camera. So you can't get out of it. And that's what his purpose is here. He also is here to, in case we do have any glitches or we have interruptions, he then begins to troubleshoot them from our end, as well as the people at the Pyle Center do kind of the same thing. You have microphones in front of you. You have to be, in order to be able to be interactive and answer questions and participate in conversations with students on that end or Dr. Dombeck and vice versa, you have to have a microphone. You don't need to talk loud into these microphones. You can talk just the same way as you would with your normal voice. And there's one microphone for every 2 students. So if that microphone is kind of between you, as you are over there, you can probably aim it closer to you a little bit. All you have to do to talk is push to talk on these. Am I right, Steve? Okay, good. I want to check on that because we switch these around for different classes and for different distance ed rooms. Now, what that means is you've got a little bar in front of you, and when you push that down and hold it down, all you have to do is talk. Let's try it from one of you 2 here. Which one wants to volunteer and just give your name and where you're from here?
My name's Peter.
Okay.
I'm from Stevens Point.
Thank you, Peter. And that's a good way to do that. Sometimes this is just going to be 2-way between here and the Pyle Center. Sometimes we have as many as 8 places and 8 sites on a teleconference. And what we ask students to do then is just identify who they are and where they're from. So you may be Jill from Stevens Point or Ralph from Madison. And that helps identify who you are and where you're coming from, and that helps us a great deal. The one thing we ask students to make sure that they do when they're in these classrooms is be proactive as students. If you can't see something or if you haven't heard something, because sometimes a student won't hold the bar down for the entire question, they'll let it up in the middle, and it will kind of come out like that, and you will break it up, and you say, I didn't hear that. It didn't get across to me. Could you repeat the question? Or I didn't hear what the student said. Have them repeat it. Ask so you don't lose any information. If there's visuals that are put up, they're a little hard for you to see or you can't get them, ask. Don't just sit there and suffer in silence and then turn in lousy evaluations at the end of this whole thing and say, this was just terrible. We couldn't see or hear anything. So be proactive. You are not watching television. You are not on television. There is, granted, a certain amount of self-consciousness when you first start out with some of these because you can see the students at the other end and they can see you, but after a while, take my word for it, it goes away. It's just like a normal class. And the television idea and the idea of watching television, you're on television, leaves very, very quickly, and you'll begin to concentrate on the content and you will get into the lesson very quickly. I don't have a whole lot more to tell you. Those are pretty much basic things. If you need to talk to the instructor after class, one is this has a set scheduled time. And I believe, Mike, do we go to 3 o'clock?
We'll go to 2:50.
Okay, to 2:50. So if you have questions afterwards and maybe something hasn't been covered, you may have to find another route to be able to talk to him. You may have to talk with your instructor to see if is there a telephone that you can get to call him later, maybe email address or something like that, and you can use. Because at 3 o'clock, the network will move to another class that comes on from another place at 3 o'clock. Anybody have any questions? Great. I hope you have fun. I hope it's a great class, Mike. It's all yours.
Well, thanks, Ron. Thanks for the orientation. And by the way, I'll be here till 3, but I know some of you either at Stevens Point or here might have other classes, and the scheduled time is from 2 to 2:50. But this should be issues in global conservation, natural resources 796 if you're in Stevens Point, and if you're here in Madison, it should be environmental studies 900. And a lot of today will be logistics, but not all of it. And what I'll say is I think we've had a room change here, and perhaps not all of the people are here yet. So what I'll want you to do next week is we'll sort of do a little bit of an introduction of what you're working on for grad students projects. Miriam, are you back from Mexico? Are you there in Point yet? I guess Miriam Wyman's not back yet. But at any rate, I was just talking with Kathy Gonzalez here and as a graduate student, and she just got back from Mexico working on issue in forestry, social issues with the transition of a community from sustainable agriculture or subsistence agriculture to logging. And Miriam's working on sort of a transition from a subsistence situation to ecotourism. So I think there perhaps we can make some connections there, because that's really the objective, is for us to get to know one another better and try to get a little bit more comfortable with this technology. This is my first time at it, and if any of you are going to end up in a classroom like this, I can guarantee you this is what you're going to be doing, as opposed to what I did. The chalkboard, I think, is a thing of the past, which is okay for me, because my writing is terrible. But let me just first put up the, this is the web address that most of the material that I will cover today is on. So we'll just leave that up for a minute for you to write down. And any new material, the course schedule, my office hours, phone numbers, email, the student roster as it stands now for both campuses is posted there. So that's something that's the basic information that I'll cover today is on there. The second thing that I want to show you before we switch to the PowerPoint presentation is this is issues in global conservation, and basically and a seminar, a one-credit seminar, and you decide what issues you really want to focus on and analyze in detail, because that's really the way it works in the real world. Our objective is not to come up with some sort of a case and try to design some case. The objective is to have try to emulate a real world situation as much as possible. And I spent 25 years working for one federal agency or another, and have got lots of scars from debates and hearings and public meetings, and lots of fun, by the way, also. It's not all bad. It's at least 90% very, very positive. It's just those very few issues that are really tough and really, really controversial, but those happen to be the ones that get all of the press and all of the visibility. But if you look at what I have here on the overhead, what I'm going to be talking about the next couple of class sessions are the issues that I think are important. And they both basically focus around public land, and what we've got is a read-only PDF file of, I'm in a process with a couple of colleagues of just finishing up a book called From Conquest to Conservation. That would be the second item here. And Chapter 1, that's in draft at this point yet. It's into the editors, but that basically describes the context of public land. And it's only about 15 pages or so, and if you, I won't take the time to explain what the Bureau of Land Management is, what the Forest Service is, how they evolved, those that say give the land back, what is the constitutional basis for the fact that all the people in the United States own the public land. So that's all listed in this chapter. And then the upper one, it says the Big 10 Public Land Conservation Challenges for a New Century. What that will be a text of a conservation lecture that I gave at Berkeley not too long ago. I gave an earlier version of it both at Stevens Point and here at Madison, and it's changed significantly since the oral version that some of you may have heard if you attended that colloquium or seminar. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the PowerPoint. And just quickly go over some of the objectives. My computer's got to wake up here. Now, those of you at Point, go ahead and it's doing what I thought it might do, Rich. I just need to go to next. Can you tell which one is next on there? Is it the top one? I go to the next slide, okay. Okay, good. Well, hopefully that won't happen again. If not, one of you, did you tell me how to do that, Kathy, or was it me? Andrea told me you might have to come up here and run this. The objectives and what I hope that you get out of this, and this is, let me just move over a little bit so I'm not right in the line of view of this overhead here. Number one is to acquire an understanding of selected conservation issues. I'm going to go over the next couple of classes, I'm going to go over 10 issues in a not an in-depth but sort of a common sense way, because that's the way the public views issues. And when you're dealing in the public policy arena, you're going to have to explain very technical issues in sometimes very simple ways. And I think it was Senator Hayakawa from California some years ago that said he got his PhD and it took him 3 years to get over it. He had to relearn how to communicate so people could understand him. And the issues that you'll be working on, you pick. We'll focus a little bit about improving your skills in policy analysis. And of course, then we'll do a short verbal presentation and a short written presentation. So I sort of summarize these objectives as the first one is what are the issues? The policy analysis is what are we going to do about them? And then the third and fourth objectives are how do we communicate what we want to do about them. And what you'll be doing, and the first one here is by far the hardest, and that's selecting a specific issue or segment of a larger issue for some sort of in-depth analysis. And we'll talk about a lot more about that later. But in essence, I think it was Aldo Leopold that said, instead of learning more and more about less and less, we need to learn more about the entire biotic community. And in an essence, most of the education that most of us, and probably you've had, your entire career has been sort of analyzing specific details about specific issues, the physiology of an animal or a plant or a microhabitat or a specific land use issue or whatever it might have been. Now, how do we put all this together? So the scope of this seminar is to sort of reverse that and take it into a macro direction. So, what if you're chairman of the Senate Resources Committee? What issues are you going to move forward? What if you're a Secretary of Agriculture, Chief of the Forest Service, Head of the Bureau of Land Management, Secretary of the Interior? What issues are you going to move forward from that platform, and then how are you going to move them forward? How do you segment an issue to communicate it to the public so that they understand it? All of those kinds of things is sort of the approach we'll come at this from. Review the policy options and make policy recommendations for a specific issue. Again, how do you segment an issue and communicate it to a skeptical public, a biased public, a proactive public? How do you sell it to a legislative body? How do you sell it to the employees in an organization? How do you communicate it? That's really what we want to focus on here. And then and we'll talk more about that soon. And then to give a 15 to 30 minute oral presentation and write a less than 800 word briefing paper on what that issue is that you select. In 3 weeks, the third class session is when we will, as a group, select and decide what specific issue you will work on. And my objective here is to, sometime between now and the end of the next class period, I'll talk about 10 issues. And you can pick one of those 10. You can pick almost any kind of issue that you want. If you want to work in teams, that's fine. It's because sometimes, various interests get together and gang up on the opposition as they move issues forward. So any of that is really okay with me. Now, from the standpoint of the briefing paper, and this will come in April, is basically all we want is a summary of the issue, what are a background, what our options are, and what you recommend. Now, my experience in working in the agencies has been fascinating. If you go to the research section, for example, the Forest Service has about 33,000 employees, about half of the natural resources research capacity in the United States. If I, as chief, would ask a group of scientists for a briefing paper on some issue, they really had a tough time writing it. They would give me all the technical jargon, and then I have to send that briefing paper either to the White House or to the Senate or to the House of Representatives or to the cabinet member, the secretary, and that doesn't work. Oftentimes I would find somebody that was a major in communications, liberal arts, or English and say, hey, do a briefing paper on the impact of clear cutting on the Rogue River National Forest, and send it to and I'd get a 2-pager that was very clear, concise, to the point, with some recommendations in it, and that's what we're going to try to do here with the written part of it. And then, of course, the oral presentation is you're going to have to convince us that your recommendation is worth considering. So again, we live in a world of sound bites. In fact, my daughter, who's a senior at Virginia Tech in biology and chemistry this year, just took a communications class, and she said now a sound bite, according to her professor, was about 7 seconds. So we're an impatient world. We don't want a lot of jargon. We don't want a lot of detail. We want, just cut to the chase and what are my options, and move forward from there. That's essentially the objectives of what we're going to try to do. Any questions before I go any further? Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. The grading, fairly subjective. I'll be the first to admit that. My office hours at Stevens Point, 2 to 4 on Tuesdays. I'll be here in Madison. I usually get here around 10 or 10:30. I live in Plover, which is just south of Stevens Point. So I'll have, it's an open door from 10:30 to 12, or we can meet just before class, just set another time. And I'll be down here more than just the specific class times in Madison as well. I'm on too many committees, from the Wisconsin Academy of Sciences to other kinds of things, so I get down to Madison fairly often. In Stevens Point, you all know where you are. College of Professional Studies 104. We're at the Pyle Center here in Madison, only we're not in room 312, but Rich, we will be next week, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, there was apparently some technical problems with 312. So we're in 327 today, and hopefully those that aren't here will get caught up. Be sure to let them know the website and stuff so they can catch up with where we are. This is what I'm going to talk about, but first let me just get the names of who's here. Now, just one person walked in that I didn't. Okay, Todd. I've heard about you. Where are you from? Ames. Hey. Okay. I spent some time at Iowa State. Let's just quickly go around the table there at Stevens Point. Brian.
Here.
Okay, Brian. Melinda.
Yeah, it's Mindy.
It's Mindy? Okay. The video screen that I'm seeing isn't quite clear enough to make out exactly who you are, even if I've met some of you, and that's my excuse for blindness. Peter Brown said he was there, right, from Stevens Point. Jim, I got an email from you. You found the place. Good. Amy?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Amy. Betsy?
Yep, here.
Okay. Michelle?
Here?
Gotcha. Okay. Julie?
Here.
Okay. And Miriam must still be in Mexico if she's not there. Okay, excellent. What I'm going to do now is go over the Big Ten issues, and we're going to try to get about 4 of them in today and leave about 5 minutes for questions for everyone, and then I can stay till 3 o'clock before we get cut off the air here. And let me just say that most of what I'm going to say is already on the web. It's written down. You don't have to write it down. We just want to sort of talk about stuff and tell a few stories about issues. Oh, I forgot one really important point, and this is I guess put it down for part of your assignment. We're going to go over the schedule next week, and it may change depending upon what your schedules are, because basically the plan is we're going to have 4 50-minute sessions like today. So today and 3 more. I've tried to schedule them so we have 3 weeks in a row, so you can make sure you know exactly where you want to go on your assignment and your analysis of your issue. And then about mid-March, we'll meet just to sort of visit about you have questions, logistical things as a group, so we can make sure that, part of the discussing these issues, and this is what I'm working on, and I'm having problems, and that kind of thing. And then the last 2 sessions we'll have, I've put the dates and the times down as much as a placeholder, but I thought what we'd do is we'd have some fun and get out, and one of the places, if you haven't been, you'll go, and that's to the shack. And we'll spend some time. Half of you will do your presentations at the shack, and then we'll go for an afternoon hike and talk about where the good oak was. And if it's a nice day, maybe Nina Leopold Bradley, Alda Leopold's, one of his daughters, will come out with us. I'm on the Leopold Foundation board, so I've got a little bit of an in with them, or else Buddy Huffaker, the director of the Leopold Foundation, or somebody. And that leaves a second Saturday, which I was thinking of. We could go to the Muir Farm and do the same thing. We could go to the Badger munitions plant. There's different. So think about where we might want to go for that second Saturday session, and we'll get that tied down hopefully next week. If not next week, the week after. And I know a couple of people. One person emailed me, and they have a wedding. It seems to me that's pretty important. So we'll figure out if you have a life and death or marriage situation that you can't make one of the Saturdays. We'll figure something out, but we're going to make you pay for not being part of it in some way. So be sure to take a look at this web page, and then take a look at your calendars, and we'll see what adjustments we can make. And if everybody agrees that you'd rather do it on a Sunday, or you have a Friday or a weekday, that's okay with me. I'm probably one of the more flexible people, since I don't have the class schedules that you have. So take a look at the dates and locations, the dates, and come up with ideas for a second place we might want to go. We could get Kurt Miney, for example, to do a session on tell us what's going on at the Badger munitions plant, and all the negotiations there would be an idea of something we could do. As I said, there's lots of places, and I'm trying to pick places that are sort of halfway between here and Stevens Point, so it makes it easier for us to meet. And hopefully we'll have bright sunny days that are warmer than today. Okay, the Big Ten. This is, as I mentioned earlier, I selected the Big Ten, and I've been giving some talks around the country and stuff on these issues. And my objective is to try to get people engaged in conservation. Keep issues at the forefront, because that's the way issues get resolved. And there's a lot of background noise. We've got September 11th, that's terrorism, anthrax, all kinds of things are making headlines. And one of the concerns is, well, that this has given one segment an opportunity to sort of make some changes and fiddle with policy while they're not on the front page of the newspaper, which they typically would be. So has conservation moved from the front page to the back page? And one of the things I've been doing is talking about issues that I think are important, and writing about them. And the speech that I have, the text of it is posted on that website for you to take a look at. But I'll just say that these are my issues. 2 issues that are very, very important that I don't talk about are population growth and global warming, and they're both very, very complex, very, very controversial, difficult to make policy changes, national or international policy changes on those issues. But the first one I'll mention, if I get this, okay, we need to go the other way. Is me just say a few words about this introduction here. Think about, I talked about maybe some role playing, but think about the role of the executive branch and how they can elevate and surface issues. Obviously, the president can make an issue, a priority. When I was in the Forest Service, Bill Clinton got interested in road lists. He got interested in national monuments. Herbert Hoover was president. He designated national monuments. Teddy Roosevelt started the National Wildlife Refuge System, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Wilderness Act, all those kinds of things. Those are major, major national policy changes. A significant thing has happened since about 1970 in U.S. politics as it pertains to conservation, and that's that the judicial branch of government has gotten involved. And for those of you that are really into the resource management, you need to ask yourself the question of why. Why was it that before about 1960 or 1970, it was the congressional branch, the legislative branch, funded the agencies, passed some legislation, and the executive branch implemented that legislation? You know, like the chief of the Forest Service, the Secretary of Interior, they all essentially work for the executive branch or the president. But for some reason, the judicial branch got involved starting about 1970. And a lot of natural resource policy today is evolving from case law. And I got to tell you that if you've got a bent toward law and you're really interested in conservation, it's not a bad way to have an influence, because the role that environmental lawyers play today is very, very significant. And yet, 40 years ago, they had almost no role. I keep on hitting the back instead of the front one. Okay. The first issue that I want to talk about is mining law, and I use this as an example, and it's not a big issue here in Wisconsin, but it's probably one of the most vexing laws and the oldest law on the books. You know, think about 1872. Women couldn't vote. The country was still reeling from the Civil War. To a large part of the country, St. Louis was marked the western frontier. And the mining law was a law that was written by miners for miners. So much pressure was put on the United States that wasn't prepared to deal with mining, and that's sort of how we got to where we are with mining law. The interesting thing with mining law, and much of what I said is on the PowerPoint there, is that the royalty provisions are antiquated. It's basically a giveaway of public resources. Many people have tried to change it since about 1940, but you and I are all owners of the gold that's under the federal lands, the silver, the other hard rock minerals, and foreign and multinational corporations pay no royalty. In addition to that, they mandate privatization of public land for about $2.50 to $5 an acre. I don't know if you recall seeing, Bruce Babbitt would have the greatest heist since Jesse James, as he tried to elevate the fact that he was having to sign, as Secretary of Interior, he had the authority and the responsibility to sign the deed giving the mining company the federal land, and of course he had to do it because it was required by law, but he always objected. Again, you see $2.50 to $5 an acre, that's basically 1872 prices. But the most significant difference and thing with the 1872 mining law is the last point on the screen there, and that's that every other resource use on public land, whether it's timber, grazing, oil and gas, recreation, building a trail, go through a National Environmental Policy Act process, and a field level manager, a professional resource manager, makes the decision whether or not that project should move forward or not, based upon environmental and public safety reasons, all except mining. Just like the Secretary of Interior, per the 1872 mining law, has got to sign that deed, giving that land to the mining company. The mining company then mines it, and we had one situation that made the press where land was sold for about $17,000 an acre after they did a little bit of mining there. It's not, I don't want to make this sound like a complete free-for-all, because we're all going to want to go out and get federal land and and resell it or something. The mining company does have to prove that there's a mineable deposit there. It has to go through an assessment, but the only requirement is that it has to be economic for them to do it. And obviously, if it wasn't, why would they do it? They are not there just passing the time away. Several attempts to change the mining law have occurred in Stuart Udall, who was Secretary of the Interior under Kennedy and Johnson, left office after his 8-year term and basically said, look, this was the last major natural resources law that we really need to change. And in the Clinton administration, the early years of the Clinton administration, there was an interesting dynamic. There was dialogue, well, should we take on grazing, or does Bruce Babbitt and others take on grazing or mining, or how do we do this? Well, one of the things they did is took grazing on first, and that was a major tactical error because it refocused all of the political entities, the lobbyists, the conflict industry. The timber and the mining lobbyists started donating money to the grazing lobbyists because their whole objective was to keep them busy. Because if they could keep them busy on grazing, they wouldn't have time to take on other issues. So there's all sorts of things like that that happen in a democracy, and I'm not implying this is bad. I'm just saying that's sort of the way it is. But at any rate, by the time that the 2-year congressional session was near to an end, that would have been about September, October of 1993, almost all of the issues surrounding revision of the 1872 mining law had been resolved. Congressman Rahal from West Virginia was the chairman of the subcommittee that dealt with it. A couple of minor issues went unresolved. Congress adjourned, and it all went by the wayside. Because what happened in the 93 election is the House and the Senate both switched from Democrat to Republican. Clinton was bleeding from a variety of, or hemorrhaging from a variety of other issues, and the Republican Congress just did not want to take on mining law, and so it goes unresolved as a result of that. It's the staying issue of the 1872 mining law is what's absolutely phenomenal. If you look at it from the standpoint of logic, common sense, it's a no-brainer. But yet, the question is, so, how do we change it? Why do enough members of Congress support not changing the 1872 mining law that they somehow seem to be able to block it? I want to talk a little bit about wildland fire, another issue. So this would be my issue number 2 on the list. And there's some interesting things associated with wildland fire. And that's that, and we're going to talk about education next week, that the Smokey Bear public education campaign was the most successful conservation education campaign ever, certainly in the history of the U.S., probably in the history of the world. And in 1968, more people knew who Smokey was than knew who the president was. Pretty phenomenal. Smokey was the second most commonly recognized character in the United States. And no, Mickey wasn't one, it was Santa Claus. Now the challenge for those of us that are interested in conservation is how do we recreate this in other issues? This level of awareness that inner city kids, kids that grow up in poverty, kids that grow up in wealth, most of them seem to know who Smokey was, and phenomenal education campaign. The thing that we find with wildland fire is, and it's much more of a problem, just like mining law in the Intermountain West or in arid areas than it is here in Wisconsin. But the fire season is very predictable if you're a firefighter. It starts in Florida, about now. And it goes from Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, and then it starts in Southern California, March February, late February, March. It moves into Arizona, New Mexico, and then it starts moving north up the spine of the Rockies, the Intermountain West, the Cascades. And by the time we hit August and September, it's ending in Montana and Idaho in a typical year. So it's very predictable. What the key situation with fire is that we were so good at fighting fires, and we took it so seriously, and Smokey did such a good job that we taught the world that all fire was bad. And then lo and behold, about 1970 or so, we began to realize that fire was a natural part of the ecosystem, that it was a cleansing agent like wind and water, and that the chaparral and most forests evolved with fire. If they were adapted to fire, if they weren't, they wouldn't be there. And what was new on the landscape was us and our houses that weren't adapted to fire. And our challenge now is, as a society, is to reverse that. And we've got the best wildland firefighters in the world, and we've been putting out fires for 100 years. And there's a graph of the acres burned from actually about 1910 to 2000. And the early data is not real accurate, but they were estimates. But 1910 was the milestone year for fire. And that was the year that the United States of America declared all-out war on wildland fire, because we had a terribly dry year, lots of acres burned. It was sort of like 1871, which was the year of the Peshtigo fire, when the Peshtigo fire in Wisconsin remains to be the worst wildland fire in history, where about 1,500 people died. And that year, just in the northern Wisconsin and the upper peninsula of Michigan and northern Minnesota, about 3.7 million acres burned. And they were slash fires after logging. A lot of them were intentionally set and escaped. So if you look at the graph there, you see about the 1920s, 1930s, we really got our firefighting machinery in the United States in shape. By 1940s, we were deploying smoke jumpers to put out fires in the backcountry. All this time, fuel is accumulating. And if your natural fire cycle was every 7 years, if you were in the chaparral, or maybe every 30 years, if you were some mid-elevation in the Intermountain West, we were still effective at putting out fires. And today, our wildland firefighters put out about 98% of the fires in initial attack. Good job market, by the way, for summer people. Both the BLM, Forest Service, all the agencies are hiring firefighters like gangbusters, because most of the it's another topic, but the age demographics of a lot of the federal agency and state agency employees is that many of them are ready to retire or close to it. So if you're looking for summer work and you're interested in firefighting, the job market for that is good. I'm amazed with people like smoke jumpers. You see people from almost every walk of life, and they sort of get addicted to that lifestyle. And there's a lot of teachers, professors, various people that are involved in firefighting. We've got to somehow communicate to the American public that we need to put fire back on the land. How do we do that? How do we suddenly convince, we know fire is dangerous. A tremendous natural resources conservation challenge that we have in this country. The second one associated with fire is the urban wildland interface. Everybody wants their 10 acres on the mountainside. So now what we have is we've got an urban wildland interface and subdivisions and developments backed right up to fire-prone ecosystems, and they're up and down the east slope, up and down the west slope. They're in the Bitterroots, they're in the Cascade Range, around Lake Tahoe. $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 homes, and they're expecting those homes to be protected. And if their house burns, they're mad. The cost of structural firefighting is high. It's very, very different than wildland firefighting. Some of the concerns that people have are air quality and smoke. We want to prescribe fire in public lands and national forests, or BLM lands, and yet a rice farmer in the Central Valley of California can't get a permit to burn his rice field. Tremendous communications challenge. A wheat farmer in eastern Washington can't burn his field, but yet we say, hey, we've got to burn this apply prescribed fire to these forested landscapes. How do you explain that to them so they accept it or understand it? Because the bottom line is, it's going to burn either with us or without us. And the year 2000 was an exceptionally bad year because of the drought conditions. And so do you want to take that, even though EPA regulates air quality and smoke, when it's a natural fire, the regulator is somebody else. And a big challenge associated with that. I'll go ahead and go back to the, how do we get society to accept fire? I just wanted to tell a little story about Bill Clinton. President Clinton was the only president to ever go on a fire. And I was out west almost all year. The year 2000 was a real bad fire season. We had spent, the Forest Service alone had spent $1 billion fighting wildland fire. Now just think if we could take $1 billion and do in an education campaign or training or whatever, that rather than apply it in the emergency room when there's an emergency, if we could do it in a proactive way. At any rate, Bill Clinton decides he's going to go on a fire. The phone rings. I'm out in Montana, and the White House wants us to do advance to get ready for the president to go on the fire. So we had, well, obviously there's got to be fires where we take him. And our choices were Nevada, California, Idaho, and Montana. And where is he going to go? Well, California, of course. There's 54 electoral votes. There's an election coming up in November. The guy's a great showman. I mean, he is the master of communications and the master politician. Well, as it ended up, he decided to come to Idaho. And the fascinating thing with that part of it was the senior senator from Idaho, Larry Craig, who was chairman of the Public Lands Committee at that time, disliked President Clinton so much he didn't go to the State of the Union address for the last 2 years. Well, they come out to Idaho, and who gets off of Air Force One behind Bill Clinton but Larry Craig? And it was almost a love-in. But the other interesting thing with Clinton's selection of going to Idaho was the fact that there probably isn't one person in a radius of 100 miles that voted for him, because it's very, Idaho's very anti-Fed. There's a lot of public land there. They didn't like Bill Clinton. And yet, to see, it was just a fascinating experience to be able to see him operate in an environment like that, and everybody that he came in contact with him would have voted for him. That was the skill that he had, and we could tell a lot of stories about Bill Clinton, but at any rate, the bottom line as a result of that fire, and we flew the fire, talked a lot about fire. He had a lot of questions. He took a nap, ate a banana, ate a bagel, said he'd rather go on a vacation in National Forest, but Chelsea liked to go to Nantucket because she had friends there, and it's just, very informed. But one of the things that always amazed me with President Clinton is when he got engaged in an issue, he really got engaged and he really knew the details. I mean, he read everything from fire safety manuals to, he was conversant in the language, which was, I think, very, very unusual for somebody with his kind of workload and responsibility. The result of that trip was that when the president goes someplace, he's either got to have a signing ceremony or some kind of public event or something, and what he did was he, as a result of that, the Forest Service and other agencies, we got our biggest budget increase in history, going from 3.3 billion to 4.4, which is just absolutely phenomenal. And the reason that I think that's phenomenal is because it was just 2 years before that the Congress was threatening to cut the budget to a custodial level because they didn't like the fact that we took on roadless. So here we are, 2 years prior to the biggest budget increase in history. They say we're just going to cut you to almost nothing. So I'm going to stop there for today. I had intended on going through the exotic species issue today, but we'll start there next Wednesday. I'll be at Stevens Point. You'll be in room 312. If not, it will be posted right Rich.
That's right.
And we will continue on with these issues. Think about your schedules and particularly the Saturday field trips so we can try to tie down the dates. Those from Madison that missed the course, be sure you give them the URL for if you know them. And let me just stop and say, are there any questions? First, let's go to Stevens Point, since I know you've got to be out of that room sooner than we do here in Madison. Any questions at that end? Okay, you should have everything. My email. Did I see a hand go up back there?
Yeah, you did. I have a course conflict. Are these sessions taped at all, or is there any other way that I could stay in the class?
I'll have to. You've got a conflict with this time period.
The class was canceled today. That's why I'm here, and I kind of want to still take both classes. And I was just curious if these sessions were taped, or if there's any other way to get around that conflict.
I don't know if there's a way to tape them, so I guess just stay tuned. My guess is probably not, but since this is my first time doing this as well, I'm not the ultimate expert in this. So why don't you send me an email, and I'll do a little bit of checking tomorrow and see if there's any way around that.
Okay, I'll talk with my other instructor too.
Now, keep in mind that we're only going to be meeting here 3 more times, and it could be that if your other course, that there may be some accommodations at that end that could be made.
Okay, I'll look into that.
Good. Anything else there at Point? Okay, we'll go out and enjoy the sunshine. Any questions here? Sure. Have a good week, by the way.
Is the issue that we're going to be addressing for our project going to be the same throughout the class?
No. Anybody can pick, you can pick virtually any issue you want, and as I said, I think that's going to be the hardest part of the whole class, is to pick an issue that's workable, that's reasonable, and there's a lot of reasons I say that, because it's the same in when you're in the hot seat, is when you take on an issue, the timing of an issue. Is it ripe? Is it premature? Is it going to conflict with other issues? All those things come into play as the decision-making machinery, the public opinion, how the press deals with it works. So the smaller bites you take, the better. But the thing that I think is important is that the focus of this class is to sort of look at macro issues. And it's not to take a little tiny piece about what's going to happen on 40 acres and sort of ask yourself, okay, you're going to be Secretary of the Interior. What are you going to do? And how are you going to decide what you're going to do? Because, people make those decisions all the time. If you're going to be chairman of the House Resources Committee or the Public Lands Committee, what are you going to do? What's your agenda going to be? And how are you going to approach it? So I would ask yourself that set of questions as you think about, an issue. I'll talk about roadless, one that I was deeply involved in, roadless on national forests and how it evolved. And I'll talk about that next week when we talk about another issue that's a big one in my book, and that's the fragmentation of our land, our landscape. Any other questions? Have a great week. I'll see you next Wednesday in 104 College of Professional Studies. Thank you, Rich.
Oh, no problem.